And right now we're in the middle of a series we're calling Write This Down. And I am particularly excited about this weekend for a couple reasons. One is that this is a message, okay, that couldn't be more about Jesus. And there's this trick, like this challenge in the church to only talk about the cross and the resurrection at Easter. And I think it's really good from time to time for us to be reminded of these truths so that we can realize what has been done for us, and also so that we can realize why Jesus can ask the things out of us that he can. And so it's really important for us from time to time in the life of the church to focus on some of these aspects. And I'm also particularly excited about this text this morning because it is one of the more controversial texts in the entire New Testament. And so we're going to look at that too. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. And I just want to read you the verses that are controversial. Okay, so we're just going to dive in head first. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. That is not that. That's just blood. But here, I'll read this to you on my thing. So here we go. He, Jesus, went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you. And we'll just go ahead and stop there. Everything that's underlined is like controversial. And just to give you a little bit of picture of how debated these two verses are. Okay, so when I got saved, I was at a church, and they used to do this thing where you could come on a Sunday night, and the pastors would sit on the stage, and you'd go to a microphone, and you would ask them a question, and they would answer it from the Bible, and they didn't know them ahead of time. Think of how horrifying that sounds. So they had one of those nights. And I remember, like I was an arrogant teenager, and I wanted to stump my pastor, and so this is what I did. I came and I asked him what that was talking about. And so he gave us, he's heard it before, and he gave his take, and so I remembered that take, and then as I was studying for this weekend, I read a commentary, the one I like the most. It's a Tyndale commentary written by a man named Goeden. His take is actually different than my former lead pastors, and so I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And so then I hop into Ryan Zaffroff's office because the youth are doing the same thing that we're doing, and he's using a commentary by a lady named Karen Joves, and her take was different than their takes, and so I'm like, that's 3 different takes on this, and so I'm like, I wonder what the great reformer John Calvin would think. So I get out my copy of Calvin's Institutes and I read it. He has a different take too, so we got 4 different opinions on what this means. And so then I'm just kind of reading, trying to grasp all of what is this saying? And then I came across this quote by Martin Luther. Okay, Martin Luther is a confident man. You have to be confident to say to the church that's been around for 1,500 years, we are going to break off from you. This is what Martin Luther says about these 2 verses. A wonderful text this is, and a more obscure passage perhaps than any other in the New Testament. So that I do not know for certainty what Peter means, I cannot understand it, and I cannot explain it. This is Martin Luther talking. So he pretty much just says, yeah, I don't know. So it's a controversial text, and people really disagree at the weeds. But it's really important that though people disagree at the weeds, everyone agrees at the big idea. Like, people are confused about what those 2 verses mean and what is happening, but everybody would line up on the big idea, and this would be the big idea of the text, is that Jesus Christ, he suffered for you to give you victory. And now he is reigning in heaven. Like that is what he wants you to see. And this is just like a supplemental part of that. So let's look at the whole text in its context, and then we'll go through. I promise I will give you my take on what it means, but I just wanted to whet your appetite. So here we go. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, for the righteous and the unrighteous, or for the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels and authorities and powers having been subjected to him. So I'm going to answer this text answers 3 questions about the person of Jesus. The first question is this, is why did Jesus suffer and die for me? Why the cross? Why did he do the things that he did for you? And you see that right away. Look at verse 18 here. Is it he suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. Why? Because he wants to make a way for you to God. That everything that Jesus went through, he went through for you so that you might know God. And really, when you think about suffering, like Peter has spent the last chapter and a half talking about suffering, talking about submitting yourself to things that are unjust. And really, like, after a while, you kind of wonder, like, okay, why? Well, the reason why is because Jesus did exactly that for you. That he's not asking you to do anything that Jesus himself wouldn't have been willing to do. And verses like this are really important because we live in a time, okay? We live in a time where we really want to be able to say, Jesus is one of many ways to God. Like, we hope that's, like, I'm sure there's some of you that you just hope that it's one of many. And here's the struggle with that. This text is the struggle with that. Because if he's just one of many, then it forces this really difficult text question when you look at verse 18. And the question you've got to ask if you're going to say that he's just one of many is, okay, well then if that's the case, then why did God make his son go through that if there would have been another way that would have been easier? Because if there is, God in his power, he could just reveal a new way and make it known. But he knew that this is what it took so that he might bring you to God. And what Peter wants us to see is he wants us to see that the cross, is very difficult. That it was not an easy action that was flippant, but instead it was incredibly costly. And when you think about people, okay, and I would say that this is especially true of me, that I am a least, like, I'm an easiest way type of person, okay? So, like, if there's an easier way, I'm going to find it, okay? If there's a corner I can cut, I will try to cut it. And you see this happen in my house when we ask our kids what they want to drink for dinner, okay? My wife is a very gracious woman, and she's a better human being than me, but no one would ever question that. And she does this with our kids. She'll look at them when the dinner's ready, and she'll say, "What would you like to drink?" Which is like the worst question ever, because that just opens up the world to anything in our fridge they could drink. Like, they could have orange juice. They could have milk. They could have 2 different drinks. They might want to put ice in some of that, and then you're just like, it's getting really confusing. Who puts ice in milk? My kids do sometimes. And then if we know that they're drinking something, or like we made a dinner that they're not going to enjoy, then it opens up the realm to smoothies. Smoothies. Have you ever cleaned a blender? It's the worst. And so, like, she's like, what do you want? And then it's like, okay, then we have all these options for drinks. This is how I do it. I look at them in love and I say, hey guys, do you want ice in your water? and that's all I do, because that's how I fight my battles, because that's what you got to do. But here's the thing. Okay, here is the thing. What Peter wants us to see is that there is nothing easy about this. That the cross caused Jesus incredible amounts of pain. That there is this temptation that we have because we think, well, yeah, but he was God. And we think that maybe because he was God, maybe it was easier for him than it would have been for us. But here's what we have to realize. He suffered just like we would if it would have been us on the cross. That everything that he felt is the same thing that you would have felt if you would have been up there. Except for he did more than you could have done up there. Because when he was up there, he wasn't just dying. He was experiencing the wrath of God for the sins of all of us in this room. And here's the beauty of this text, okay, is that he only had to do it once. I mean, think of 2,000 years, it's like 2019. All those years of sin, accumulating on sin. It's quite the lofty price tag. And on the cross, Jesus was able to fully take care of all of it. And he was up there because you couldn't have been. You couldn't have paid for it, but he could. And what Peter draws our attention to is that line, he says, the righteous for the unrighteous. Jesus, he's the righteous. We are the unrighteous. That there's nothing that he endured that was just to him. There was nothing that he endured that he deserved. And it's so important that we look at these concepts because here's the thing, we're all familiar with this idea. And what familiarity does is it breeds contempt. We just forget. I mean, but put yourself in this situation. Have you ever done something and your negligence caused someone else pain? How did you feel in that moment? I mean, just imagine this scenario with me, okay? Imagine that you know the brakes are bad in your car. You know that because a mechanic told you. You know that because they're making a sound when you push them. You know that because maybe you're sliding a little bit and that there's a light on and you just know something's wrong. You know that you need to fix it. And you got someone in your office. Like, I need to run some errands, but I don't have a car. And you're like, no, we'll take mine. And they say, no, it's okay, I'll just get it later. You're like, no, I insist, take my car. And they take your car, you know your brakes are bad, they get in a wreck and they end up in the hospital because of your brakes. How would that make you feel? Well, if you're a human being with a conscience, that would make you feel horrible. Because your negligence caused them pain. That is the cross. Except for the difference is that your brakes, no one had to die. No one's son had to die. No one had to pay a price that couldn't be paid by anyone else. But on the cross, he paid for us something that we couldn't do for ourselves. And that's what Peter wants us to see. He wants us to see that there is nothing about this that we could do for ourselves. That this is a debt that is so great, that as hard as you try, that as many different behaviors and actions and things you might try to do to make up some of the deficit, that you'll find that you're only really putting in a little bit of a dent, and I wouldn't even call it a dent. It's more of a nudge. That this is the weight. That as a Christian, our heart should be, God, thank you for what you've done for me. That we should be the most grateful of all because of what has been done for us. So why did Jesus suffer and die? He did it for you. He did it for you because you couldn't do it for yourself. And then the next question we see answered in this text is the question of this, is how do I respond to this? How do I respond to this death? And this is where we get to the controversial part of the text, okay? And I would just say this, like I made it very clear that a lot of people disagree on what this means, but here's the thing. what I'm saying, even if someone has a different take and my take on this text is wrong, when I stand before God in heaven, he's not going to be like, dude, you idiot, you said something that wasn't true. He's going to say, you should have used a different verse to say that. So this is still true. And I think this is what the text is saying, and I'm pretty confident in it. But still, like if it's not, then it's not that it's not true. It's just that I should use something else. But but this is the verse. Let's look at it. How do I respond? It says this, then he, Jesus, went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of background about the wickedness of when Noah was around building the ark, because this is super important to it. So you get a little bit of picture of the time of Noah, and it wasn't just humans acting wickedly. That it was humans and then non-human beings, angels, acting wickedly, which is part of the reason why God flooded the earth. And this is a picture of the wickedness of the time of Noah right here in Genesis chapter 6. Let me read it to you. It says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took their wives as they chose. Okay, so essentially you have these angels, which we refer to as the sons of God, that they are doing actions that God has told them not to. And so that's part of the reason why God sends the flood. It's because you've got these humans, these angels. Now, to give a little bit more insight on what Peter's talking about, there was a story that was floating around during the time of Peter that his audience would have been aware of. And it's the book First Enoch. Okay, now just to give you a little bit of First Enoch, okay, that it is a book that we would not consider scripture. That we wouldn't consider it to have the same authority that First Peter has, but just because it doesn't have the same authority doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. But Peter is certainly quoting it as if it has some credibility. And so in 1 Enoch, chapters 12 through 16, it gives a little bit of a picture as to what happens to these disobedient angels after the flood. And this is knowledge that Peter's audience would have been aware of. And essentially what it says in chapters 12 through 16 is that these fallen angels were put in prison, waiting for what they would describe as the day when it all is consumed. And that is referring to the day of when it's all consumed would be the day when the price of sin has been paid. The day when sin has been satisfied. These angels, they want nothing to do with God. They want God to lose. And so you have that. So that essentially is the background on what Peter is talking about. And so if you think of all of those things in mind, it really lines up well with what's happening here in First Peter. It says, then Jesus went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because formerly they did not obey when God's patience waited in the day of Noah while the ark was being prepared. So as we look at this, okay, so you see the word spirits there. That helps us know that it's not talking about humans, because it's in the New Testament, that word is never used to describe humans. It's always used to describe angels. So we know this is talking about angels. They're in prison. Okay, and we know that they're fallen angels because prison isn't where you go on vacation, unless you had a really bad experience on spring break, but you still didn't mean to go to prison. And then we know that they were put there because of actions they did during the days of Noah. Okay, so what does that mean? So then the question is, okay, then what did he proclaim? What did he say to this group? This is what he said. You thought the cross crushed me. No. the cross means that I won. That he went to the spirits in prison to proclaim a message of victory. Because what he doesn't want to happen is he doesn't want this group of people to think that because on the cross that he lost, when actually what really happened was on the cross he won. So you put it in context with this group of people who are suffering unjustly because of things that are happening to them. And what Peter is encouraging his readers is this. He's like, when you look to Jesus, you have one who is victorious over not only the things that we see, but you also have one who is victorious over the things that we don't see, so don't lose heart, but trust in his victory. And so then what do we do with this is that we live our lives in a way that screams the victory of the cross. That we are to live our lives in a way that says, he won the day. And what we see here in the text is that it doesn't really matter how people respond. That when it's talking about Noah, it says 8 people responded, and what we know about them is they're all family, so I don't even know if that counts. But at the end of the day, it is on someone who believes in the power of Jesus to live as if Jesus is the one who gives victory. That is our response. And then we see this beautiful example of how we can proclaim the victory. And it's through baptism. Look at this. This is baptism, which corresponds to this. Corresponds to what? The victory now saves you. Not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay, so people see that and they're like, wait, the now saves you part. Like that's where it's like, well, hold on, we don't believe that's, Peter doesn't believe that is either. Look at what he says. He says the baptism saves you not as a removal of dirt. He's saying the action of being immersed in water isn't what saves you. It's what is represented by the washing that happens as you are immersed in water. And what is the action proclaiming? It's proclaiming that he won. That this is why we baptize. This is why we make it such a big deal. That we filled up the tank because someone told us on Saturday they wanted to get baptized. So we showed up and filled up the tank just because we want to proclaim the victory of Jesus. And so the question is, okay, how do I respond to this? What do I do with this? Well, the easy response is one, you live in a way that says that Jesus is victorious. The other way you respond is you ask, have I been baptized? Have you been baptized since you put your faith in Jesus? And if you haven't, then you need to get baptized. You need to mark it on a connection card and turn it into the hello desk, and we'll do it next time. Because baptism is an opportunity to proclaim the power of Jesus Christ. It is a grace that you get. Maybe you're like, well, I've been baptized, and I'm convinced that it counted. Then I would ask, well, what about your kids? Have you talked to your kids about baptism? You're like, well, that's something to start. That's a conversation to start. As a general rule, we're gonna try to wait till they're 8. But just because we want to wait till they're 8 doesn't mean you can't talk with them about it when they're 5. That you can proclaim to your kids what this says. That not only that, when someone gets baptized here, celebrate. That if you know the person who's getting baptized, we see it happen all the time. You celebrate. You post about it. You celebrate with them the power of God that is being made obvious in their life through what is happening in that tank. And maybe you're like, okay, well, I'll do that, but is there anything else? Well, then I would say this to you as well. Maybe you're here and you were baptized a long time ago. Kids have been baptized. Then here's what you need to realize. That your baptism is more than a moment. But it's something that God has given you that you can hold on to that is incredibly powerful. Because God, through his grace, gives you baptism as a place where you can proclaim the victory of Jesus Christ in front of a community of believers who celebrate with you. And especially in those moments in your life where you don't feel it. It's like, I just don't know. I just don't feel like God's near. I don't feel him. Then let me encourage you this. Remember your baptism. Because in that moment, God let you experience his grace in a powerful way. And in those moments where you wonder if God is real, if what happened in your heart is sincere, use your baptism as something that you can hold on to in those moments, because that is what is intended to do. So the last question we see here in our text is this, and what is Jesus doing right now? What's he doing now? Okay, so he went and proclaimed to these spirits a message of victory, that he died for us when he was here. Okay, so what is Jesus doing right now? Verse 21. Through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, with authorities, and powers, having been subjected to him. That right now, what's Jesus doing? He is sitting at the right hand of God. And he's not resting. He's reigning. And even think about the progression of this text. I find it so interesting. 4 verses earlier, Jesus is suffering for your sins. And here it ends with him at the right hand of God. And just think about that. That the one who you cause suffering to is now in heaven, reigning and ruling with all authority and all power. And man, isn't it a good thing that Jesus is nothing like us? Because I know for me, when someone makes me endure something hard, I'm thinking, how do I make them pay? But what is Jesus doing with that authority that's his? He's looking for ways to give you victory. He's looking for ways to empower you. He's looking for ways to bless you. And even if you think of his story, and his story in the text is the story of our lives. That you're here, you walk with Jesus, you will suffer. Sometimes justly, sometimes unjustly, but you get to do exactly what he did. And then you get to proclaim his victory. That you get to live your life in a way that proclaims his victory. And here's the beauty of that your story ends just like his in heaven with God. That is the victory that Jesus Christ made for all of us. And I think the saddest, scariest thing is that so often we stand in the way. So often he wants to give that to us, and yet we come up with all the reasons why we don't want to press in. That he wants to save you. He wants to give you life. He wants you to experience freedom. But instead, you just sit there and you think, yeah, I'm going to keep waiting. As if you know how to live better than the creator of the world. He's saying, it's all yours. The victory, I accomplished it. It's done. I did the hard part. And we sit there and we say, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to wait. Today is your day. Don't get in his way. Let's pray.
Thank you for watching our services. If you have questions or you would like more information, you can visit us online at nlspringfield.com. We'd also love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning services. We have programs at 9:30 and 11 for adults, students, and kids. We hope to see you there.